Today we're diving into one of the most powerful and honestly heartbreaking folktales from Korea. It's a story that really pushes the limits of what love, duty, and sacrifice even mean. This is the tale of Cheong.
But before we jump in, I want to ask you something that's really at the heart of this whole story. How much would you truly be willing to sacrifice for your family? I mean, really think about it. Keep that question in your mind as we go.
All right, so our story kicks off with this incredibly deep, just unbreakable bond between a daughter and her father. So meet Bangsa. He's a kind man, but he's blind. And to make matters worse, his wife tragically died right after their daughter, Cheong, was born. So he's left to raise this baby all by himself. He even had to go door to door, begging for milk just to feed her. But out of all that hardship grew this amazing young woman, Cheong. She was the very definition of a devoted daughter, this core Korean value called hyo, or filial piety. As soon as she was old enough, she took on all the work to support him. She was his entire world. Their life is hard but quiet. But that all changes because of one single, fateful moment. An encounter that leads to a promise that is just completely impossible to keep. So one day, Bangsa is out and he stumbles, falling right into a deep stream. I mean, he could have drowned right then and there. But just in time, a Buddhist monk who was passing by pulls him out of the water, saving his life. And this monk, he offers him something he hasn't had in years, a little bit of hope. The monk tells him, hey, a miracle is possible. You could get your sight back. All he has to do, offer 300 sacks of rice to the Buddha and pray with a sincere heart. Can you imagine hearing that? For a man living in total darkness, this must have sounded like a dream come true. But let's be real, 300 sacks of rice? To a poor man like Bangsa, this wasn't just a big ask. It was an absolutely insane amount of wealth, something he could never, ever get. But in that moment of pure desperation and hope, he does it. He makes the promise. And of course, the weight of that promise crashes down on him almost immediately. He's filled with despair, knowing he can't possibly keep his vow. When Cheong sees her father so utterly heartbroken, it just shatters her. And right then and there, she makes up her mind. She will find a way to get that rice, no matter the cost. And this is where the story takes a really dark turn. That promise forces Cheong to face an unthinkable choice, a choice that will lead her to a very, very dangerous place. That place is called Indangsu. Now, this wasn't just any old patch of ocean. It was famous for being incredibly dangerous. Violent storms, unpredictable currents, a real nightmare. Sailors believed a powerful dragon king ruled these waters, and you did not want to make him angry. And to keep the sea god happy, to make sure they had a safe trip, sailors had this grim tradition. They would find a young woman to offer as a human sacrifice. And as fate would have it, a group of sailors was desperately looking for a sacrifice right at the moment Cheong was desperately looking for a solution. You can see where this is going. A terrible, heartbreaking bargain is made. The sailors needed a life to appease the sea. Cheong needed 300 sacks of rice to give her father hope, so she sells herself to them, her life for the rice. So they sail out to the treacherous waters of Indangsu. Standing on the deck of the ship, Cheong says one last quiet prayer for her father. With those words on her lips, she throws herself into the wild, raging sea. And in an instant, everything goes still. The waves vanish. The ocean becomes as calm as glass. But hold on, that is not the end of her story. Not even close. In fact, this terrible sacrifice leads to the most magical, unbelievable part of the entire tale. Her devotion, it gets rewarded. You see, she didn't drown. The Dragon King, this god that everyone was so afraid of, he wasn't angry. He was deeply moved by her selfless act. He saw her pure heart and her incredible love for her father. And instead of taking her life, he rescued her, bringing her down to his magnificent palace beneath the waves. What happens next is just this wild, fantastical sequence of events. First, she lives in this amazing underwater palace as an honored guest. Then, the Dragon King decides she belongs back in the human world, so he places her inside a giant, magical lotus flower, which floats up to the surface. Some sailors find this incredible flower and, thinking it's a treasure, present it to the emperor. And when the emperor touches it, the petals unfurl and out steps Cheong. He is so captivated by her beauty and her story that he immediately makes her his new empress. So now, Cheong is the empress. She has everything anyone could ever want, except for the one person she did all this for. And that brings us to the story's beautiful, tear-jerking finale. Even with all this luxury, she never stopped thinking about her dad. So she uses her new power and comes up with a plan. She orders a massive, kingdom-wide feast, inviting every single blind man in the land to come to the palace. She's hoping, just hoping, that her father will be among them.
Days go by during this huge feast. Then, on the very last day, this poor, frail old man shuffles in. It's him. It's Simbangsa. See, he got the rice, but his grief over losing his daughter was so immense, his eyes never opened. Cheong recognizes him instantly. She runs to his side and cries out, "Father, it's me, your daughter, Cheong."
Hearing that voice, the voice of the child he thought was dead, it's just this massive shock. His heart is just overflowing with this desperate, powerful need to see her face. And he shouts out, full of disbelief and longing, "My daughter Cheong? Is it really you? I must see you." And in that exact instant, the real miracle happens. It was never about the rice. It wasn't about the monk's promise. It was the sheer force of his love for his daughter, that overwhelming desire to finally see her, that caused his eyes to fly open. For the very first time, he could see. And just like that, their long, painful journey was finally over. The daughter who gave up everything and the father who loved her more than anything were finally back together, and they lived the rest of their days happily in the palace. So this brings us full circle, back to that first question. In our world today, which is so focused on the individual, on me, what does a story about this kind of absolute selfless devotion to family mean? What can Cheong's incredible sacrifice teach us about love, family, and what we really owe to each other? That's definitely something worth thinking about.